Ready, and we've got a few online as well. So you're ready to. Okay, so we'll start off with a Karakia, and I'll get Karen to do that, please.
Thank you, Chair. Whakatakata hau ki te uru, whakatakata hau ki te tonga. Kia makina kina ki puta, kia mataratara. E ki aka ana te atura, he pio, ka he hau, i he Māori ora.
So just like to welcome some of the people here that are not normally part of the and the staff. Noel, welcome.
Is it?
Yes, you know.
Wait a minute.
Sort of goes back a few thousand years, that sort of stuff. Are we ready to go? Okay. Is it me? No. Okay, so we'll make another attempt. I just have to acknowledge that there's a little bit of latent road rage from Robbie and myself coming in this morning. It was a little bit tenuous. And in terms of guests, we've got a note here from Tiba for lateness. Apologies. Are there any further apologies at all? If not, I'll move that the apology received. Can I have a seconder, please? Yep, Gary. All those in favour, please say aye. If not, those against, carried. Okay, confirmation agenda. Just got to read the notes here. We will take a break at 11 o'clock. And are there any items on the agenda that anybody wants to change? Otherwise, I'll get somebody to move that we confirm the agenda be received as it is. Angela, seconder, please. Yeah, thanks. All those in favour, please say aye. Those against? Carried. Okay, so any disclosures of interest? If not, we'll carry on. So, in terms of general items, we've got the meeting calendar for the Regional Growth and Resilience Committee. Originally, there were 6, and we're revising it down to 4. So I'll get Karen to speak to this, please.
Oh, thank you, Chair. Very briefly, councillors, I'll take the report as read. It's self-explanatory. We had a conversation with this committee and it was felt that, you want us to amplify impact and value, so we need to do some work rather than just writing reports. And it makes good sense to reduce the number of meetings from 6 to 4. And the schedule is there with today's meeting, followed by meetings on 12th of May, 20th of August, and the 24th of November. And it's presented here to adopt and confirm.
Happy to move, Mr. Chairman.
So who moved that? Okay, and seconder, please. Yep. Okay, so this comment, sorry. Yeah, definitely. It's a cost-saving measure. Thanks, Noel, for your contribution. You won't be paid for this meeting. Okay, and yeah, I'm getting there. Okay. So, any comment on the agenda item? If not, we'll put those. All those in favour, please say aye. Against? Oh, so carried. Okay, regional economic insights. We is welcome Brad online or okay. So we welcome Brad from Infometrics, who's chief executive, and he's online. And the presentation will be on the current economic environment in the Waikato and long-term trends and opportunities. So most of you know Brad. We welcome you and hand over to you.
Wonderful. Oh, I'm coming up dark, which is an issue, clearly. Sorry about that.
Power cuts in Wellington.
There we go. Given yesterday, it certainly could have been power cuts in Wellington, although unfortunately that seems to be the case for the entire country in recent times, which is, I mean, not necessarily a topic for conversation today, but a general point that we have found that resilience is really being tested across the country. The number of days that New Zealand is spending under a state of emergency has, I think, more than doubled over the last 12 years compared to the 12 before that, which is, and the numbers so far this year, I think, have just about eclipsed the entirety of 2025, and we're only halfway sort of through February. Anyway, thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and all of you there. I was planning to be there in person, but the weather disruptions weren't playing game, and I thought it would probably be a bit better than to do it like this than trying to be stuck in an airport. But let me share my screen so that we can I can show you a few bits and pieces as we move through as well. What I'll do is sort of present for the next sort of 15, 20 minutes or so, and then I'll take your questions afterwards. I think a lot of the sort of current economic environment is still quite patchy. We have seen that even in the last couple of days. End of last week, we saw a further boost in manufacturing and services activity, which has been encouraging, a little bit more momentum in those areas. Whereas the likes of card spending data out yesterday showed that spending across the country in both December and January fell from levels seen in November. Now, partly that's the fact of a good Black Friday set of sales, but also showing that even with all of the other better parts of economic momentum showing through, we are seeing some challenges there when it comes to getting people out and spending. And a large part of that remains the likes of the labour market. Now, we will have further analysis out next week looking at the regional economy. We're just tidying up all the bits and pieces, and it didn't quite fit in as well as we could have with the committee schedule. But I also wanted to show you some of the sort of longer term trends that we're seeing for the regional economy as a bit of a scene setter, and also some analysis we've undertaken around some of the central government changes that are happening to local government over the year. To start with, though, the biggest concern that we're still facing at the moment, that's true for households, it's true for local government, it's true for businesses, is headline inflationary pressures. Now, you will have seen recently headline inflation increasing to 3.1%, just outside the top of the Reserve Bank's target band for inflation. That's been driven by a whole number of factors, the likes of higher energy costs, higher food costs, particularly for meat and dairy, and also, a number of other pressures. The worry we had when we looked at those figures is how broad-based a bit of that pricing pressure was. It wasn't just the absolute, necessities. It was a whole much wider set of things as well. However, as you can see on this chart, it is the essentials that are driving a lot of that further inflationary pressure. We've done some analysis at Infometrics to try and decompose inflation pressures into sort of essentials versus discretionary. And you can see at the moment the essentials cost pressures increasing to 3.8% over the last year. That's higher than the 3.2% 25-year average for that figure. For the likes of discretionary items, inflation for that group sitting at 1.8%, roughly in line with the 25-year average. Now, the challenge, of course, for households is that you might well be able to get a cheaper dishwasher or a lounge suite or similar, but, of course, you're not spending on those items at the moment. You're spending on the higher electricity bill and food and similar. So it is those essentials costs that are causing us some concern, and we do also expect that as inflationary pressures remain more intense than anyone was hoping for, the Reserve Bank tomorrow, when they meet and make a decision, Won't raise interest rates immediately, but will probably signal that interest rates will have to move higher a whole lot sooner than we might have first expected going back a couple of months. Turning more to the local economy and what we've seen over time, I thought that, given that we're still effectively in the start of the year, it was a bit of a useful period to think about that sort of longer term recap of where things have been. And this chart shows the top 10 industries in terms of Waikato region's growth over the last decade. What's sort of driven that growth? And you can see that of those top 10, that's contributing more than half of all the growth that the region has seen over the last decade. The biggest contributor to that growth having come through from professional, scientific and technical services. So those are jobs like accounting, scientists, economists, lawyers, often those sort of professional roles, office-based roles a lot of the time, but importantly as well, highlighting that there is a bit more of sort of a knowledge hub emerging through parts of the Waikato. And as well as that, these jobs in those industries are often driven a lot more by working from home trends and similar. So a lot more variety starting to show through. Other large increases from the likes of healthcare as well as construction, both of those being driven by population growth that you've seen around the region. Quite a lot of people coming in, quite a lot of people moving around, forming families, new subdivisions and everything else, requiring more services, both on the construction side and on the healthcare side. A number of others as you go down the list, the likes of central government activity and property operations and real estate, again, broadly driven a bit more by those demographics and population. It's the others that are probably of more interest, maybe not the absolute biggest drivers, but sort of shows a little bit more of the regional allocations. Those top 5 that I've just talked about, they're pretty similar across the country. They're always in that sort of top 10, but the likes of dairy product manufacturing providing sort of 4% of the total growth coming through over the last decade does highlight the advantage that the Waikato has when it comes to dairy product manufacturing. It's not just the number of animals, it's what you do with the outputs from them. And so on the dairy front, having a lot of factories and upping capacity and efficiencies there has been important. So too is looking at other sort of municipal services like water, sewerage and the likes. Increases in technology are also assisting the likes of telecommunications and internet services, and then a little bit less, but still important enough for sort of business in the round. And a lot of this is coming through in terms of transport and logistics with administrative and support services. That includes packaging activity and also wholesale trade, so movements of sort of larger goods and similar through there. In terms of where the Waikato is going to get the sort of biggest bang for buck, if you will, if you are able to grow things further, instead of just looking at pure growth, which we did just a slide before, this slide looks at where productivity in terms of GDP per worker is strongest in the region in 2025. And you can see that by far and away, the most productive industry in terms of that GDP per worker is coming through in utilities. The energy sector is vital, of course, to other business activities, also quite lucrative at the moment because we sort of don't have enough of it. So those areas really showing through in terms of promise. A bit more in the rental, hiring and real estate. Partly that's because of how we value houses and everything else, and I'm always a bit suspect of trying to contribute or focus too much on that. But also you see the likes of mining, telecommunications, and then financial services, which are quite a large way above most other industries in terms of those productivity levels. It's important to note that the likes of that information and telecommunications group, the 4th most productive industry in the Waikato, was one of those top 10 growers that I showed you just before, which does again highlight that sort of knowledge hub piece that seems to be coming through and supporting a bit more industry. Not that it's easy for local government to target industries, and in effect it can become quite an expensive folly sometimes, but in terms of creating the right settings for industries coming through, those top couple of industries here are very much the ones where further workers can start to produce quite significant gains for the local economy. The other, I guess, key trend that we're seeing at the moment is the diversity of population in the local area. You can see on this heat map the median age across New Zealand, and the Waikato region does actually have the biggest spread. You have the youngest median age of 33.7 years in Hamilton, all the way through to the oldest at 55.6 in Thames Coromandel. So you really do have quite a spread there in terms of the people that you're trying to support in terms of services, and also the types of business opportunities and activities that might be coming forward. I just highlight it because it does sort of show that there are going to be different horses for courses in the region. You will note, though, that most of the region, not all, but most of it does have quite a generally younger skew to it, which I think is important in terms of not only general population growth that the Waikato has seen, but also the ability to really start to be a bit more directive with a younger up-and-coming workforce in terms of what industries they might be looking at over time. The fact that there is a bit more knowledge hub activity building through, the likes of, tech and the Tron is a key part of that as well, I expect, is an important one for often younger workforces coming forward where they do have opportunities to look at those sort of technological enablements. However, this is probably one of the key ones that I wanted to highlight briefly, and that's that at the moment, still a large proportion of the Waikato region's overall economic growth in the last this is a 25-year average, has been driven much more by people numbers rather than by outright productivity. Over the last 25 years that we have data for, GDP has on average increased 2.3% in the region. However, most of that is being driven by either people or workforce, depending on how you want to cut it. If we look at GDP per capita, which is often the measure that is partly preferable, you can see that there's only been an increase of about 0.6% of GDP per capita, and being a productivity measure coming through there. The rest of the growth, the other 1.7%, has been through just pure bums on seats in terms of people coming through. Now, that means that effectively you're still seeing a much larger ability to grow just through pure people size than you do through productivity. The challenge with that is that you do start to have a little bit of concern, if you will, that if the population growth is slowing back, and it has been in recent years, that limits your sort of economic potential and means that that light blue area in terms of productive growth becomes even more important. Now, I've also given you another measure, which is looking at effectively the workforce and GDP per worker. Now, the reason I've highlighted that is because, as I've said, the Waikato does have a younger population, but also in some areas an older population. And that means that sometimes skews your GDP per capita a little bit. It's a little bit unfair to expect 10-year-olds or 80-year-olds to be sort of the driving force of the economy, but they are included in that GDP per capita figure. The other measure, GDP per worker, you can see slightly better productive growth of 0.8% economic growth coming through per worker, and the rest there, the 1.5% remainder, coming through in terms of just total increase in the workforce. Long story short, more people in the workforce or the population, they require services too, and that means that there's sort of a little bit more demand, but you're not necessarily getting that productive growth overall. If you can expand those two light blue bars, the productivity sort of figures, either on a GDP per capita or per worker basis, that's where often you'll start to be lifting overall living standards for people. It generally means more income per household, whereas if you're just growing the number of people and that's how you're growing the economy, you might well have more money in the economy in general, but it's also being split over more people, which means that households generally don't get all that much further ahead. That productive growth remains pretty vital. The last bit that I want to focus on is just a little bit of a new analysis that we've just sort of undertaken to have a little bit of a look at the cumulative increase in the share of new floor area. So effectively, relative to the rest of New Zealand, has the Waikato been seeing more or less building activity happening for different types, if you will? And you can see that over time there has been a lift in the total volume of floor area for farm-based buildings. Not too hard to pick up given the importance of the primary sector locally. But you'll see as well a bit of a lift, not a huge lift, but a bit of a lift over time in the likes of factory and warehousing space. And that does, I think, highlight that transport and logistics focus that the Waikato has. And importantly, its position within the wider Golden Triangle. What's also interesting, given that I've told you that population growth is still relatively important, is that actually the cumulative space for retail activity has been declining over time. That doesn't mean there's been less retail being built in the Waikato, it means that there's been even more being built in other areas, particularly Auckland, Wellington, and Canterbury or Christchurch. And I think that does go to show that even with the population heft that the region has, still doesn't necessarily have as much of a focus on some of the day-to-day spending activity that might be going on. It is much more, I guess, the Waikato as a region, but more of a workhorse for the economy, where people will often travel to Auckland or similar, given good connections and the likes when it comes to retail. That also, I think, reinforces that in terms of growth potential and opportunity, the focus a lot more, particularly on a productive side, is much more going to be around that sort of transport and logistics, and also the continued support for the primary sector, given what it contributes. All right, just briefly on the likes of some of the central government pieces that we've been going through. Simplifying local government activity, I think, is still ongoing, but thought it was worthwhile recapping some of the rates capping analysis that we've done recently, just to give a bit of perspective there. We know that the increase, or the cap rather, on revenue through a rates cap would have had quite a different view depending on exactly which council you were across the country. Our analysis of ratings data across the country suggests that for the likes of the Waikato Regional Council, a rates cap over the last 2 financial years that we have data for, 23-24 and 24-25, would have limited your revenue by about 5.6 million, putting you sort of towards that lower bucket there, and in the same range as most other regional councils on average. But you will see as well quite a considerable change throughout the wider group of councils in terms of the potential impact. The 2 councils that would have faced increases of over, or declines of revenue relatively of over $100 million were the likes of Auckland and Wellington council. So some pretty big pressures in some areas there. The concern a little bit that we've had when we've looked at the rates capping analysis, and that we have provided our own consultations back to the Department of Internal Affairs, is just sort of the difficulty in understanding the proposed formula that's been set. We still don't agree with inflation, headline household inflation, as the lower bound for the OPEX figure. Local councils don't spend quite as much on, the likes of meat or dairy as a household might. So we think that, not having any relevancy to local government costs is a bit of a miss. We'd also note, though, that the likes of nominal GDP growth in terms of the upper maximum doesn't properly account for general government activity in general. We have submitted that actually if the government has to use a figure like GDP growth, they're better to use a figure that we've referred them to, which is general GDP growth for government, both central and local combined, and that would push up nominal GDP growth from something like 5.8 to 7.2%. So quite a difference there in terms of how much work local and central government are doing in the economy. The other major concern we have is around population growth. DIA have advised that the population growth figures that are coming through on rates capping are just a national average. And we've had a look and found that the likes of Canterbury and the Waikato are 2 areas that have generally larger population growth figures than the national average, and I'll show you that in just a moment. The other concern is that there hasn't really been any particular detail from central government around the CapEx figure. Depreciation isn't a figure that's been outlined exactly what figure or over what period that would be calculated over. The quality of infrastructure figure that I've highlighted in my slide, I literally have no idea what data could be used for that. It's not something I've come across in my professional career. And then you have the population growth figures as well that I highlighted. As I said, the GDP growth figure is going to be a lot more important to come from looking at actual activity from the government sector. You can see on this chart that over 5 and 10 year periods that GDP growth for local government and central government and then general government combined has been significantly higher than GDP growth on average for the total economy. And so we have suggested that one of these figures is more related to actual levels of government activity, might be more reasonable for the rates cap analysis. And then just finally, looking at some of these pressures that we're seeing at the moment, we know that 28% of local areas saw stronger population growth than the national average over time. And I'd note that there are a fair number of Waikato areas in that, the likes of Waikato District, Hamilton City, Waipa, and I think Matamata Piako as well, all saw growth above the national average on average over the last decade. So effectively you would be seeing an even larger limitation being placed on the likes of the Waikato region through that, and a similar sort of trend for GDP, but I won't dwell on that much. The last bit that I wanted to highlight is that clearly there is a lot of pressure on funding at the moment, and conversation around rates caps have seen a lot more questions being asked of us at Infometrics over local government funding streams. We have looked at that trend over time for regional councils specifically, and you can see on this chart that the share of funding to regional councils from rates has actually been trending down over time anyway. A bigger increase then coming through from the likes of grants and subsidies generally from central government. But we were a little bit surprised in a sense to see not as much of an increase in the dark blue line towards the bottom there for regulatory income in terms of various fees that are charged out, or for the likes of other sales or other operating income that might be sort of more coming through from a user pays point of view. So just highlighting that's all of regional council sort of frame of reference, but just might be a useful addition to conversations heading forward and planning for the next couple of years. The final part, because that's I think a lot of information to try and take in all at once. The challenges I think that we're seeing out there in the economy at the moment are that there's a lot of structural changes, of course, particularly for local government, and I've highlighted those in terms of what we're seeing for rates capping and other cost pressures. There's a lot of short-term challenges as well. The economic recovery remains patchy, and we are sort of, I guess, more hopeful than fully convinced yet that the economic recovery is completely underway. There's further inflationary pressures that are causing challenges for households, businesses, organisations, including yourselves. But longer term, the biggest focus still remains to a degree on productivity as the way that we're able to grow just how big the pie is, rather than figuring out if we can slice it up in different ways. With that, I'll turn the economic fire hose off after my sort of time and take any questions through the chair as directed.
Thanks for that, Brad. A very good summary. So got a few questions here. I'll start off with Ben and then Gary.
G'day, Brad. Thank you. And thank you for putting all that stuff in about the rate stuff, which is obviously very relevant to us. I'm amazed that population growth is based on a national average.
Me too. So we have one of the questions that DIA was specifically consulting on was, does there need to be a bit more recognition of regional or local differences? And we've submitted clearly yes, based on that analysis where you've got 28% of, and we've done it on a TLA basis more because that will then aggregate up, if you will, to what happens at a regional level. But 28% of local council areas saw population growth above the national average, 18% saw GDP growth. So on both fronts, you'd be expecting a bit more there. I think one of the challenges talking to DIA is that they still want a fairly simple method. So having 76 different formula is probably going to be harder to administer. And so the sort of proposal we've made is that if they're going to stick with a national average growth figure in the middle, then there should be sort of a top-up allocation up to the sort of highest potential population growth that a limited number of extra councils can sort of apply for or get or some way get. So, yeah, look, it's a clear challenge given that you've seen some growth, particularly around the likes of Hamilton and probably the Waikato district as well, that have far outstripped population growth on average for the national economy.
And you'll now be punished for that, and your growth will be restricted, and you won't be able to build the infrastructure you need, which is the other issue coming up is obviously weather events. I see Fran Wilds coming out today and expressing concern about weather events and reform of local government at the same time as it's being hit. So it'll be interesting to see what their thinking is in cabinet, given we've just had these events, and as you say, 100% increase in 12 years. So that's significant. The other question I had is, what do you think central government will take back in terms of review of functions of regional government?
Oh, I'm not sure. I mean, I think that'll probably be, well, I'd like to think it'll be a lot more dictated at the local and regional level in terms of what functions are sort of, best managed there. I start to get the feeling that there's probably a number of functions and probably quite small functions across local and central government where there's possibly a little bit of consideration of, do they still best sit at a local level, or is there another way to do it? So in terms of not for regional councils, but I wonder, for example, given some of the concerns over time with, say, district licensing committees in the alcohol regulatory space, is it really useful to have, hyper local committees that decide all of those things, which are effectively, semi or quasi judicial bodies? Might they be better to be done in the round at, a more nationalised sort of level, with some recognition, or say a community partner who comes on for different decisions, but sort of be made a bit more consistently there? So I'm not yet confirmed on if there's going to be much bigger ones. I think that'll still be borne out in the consultation, but I suspect there's a number of smaller, more pragmatic changes that might be able to happen there.
Thanks for that, Brad. Gary.
Thank you, Brad. It was an interesting presentation, and I saw a few what appear to me contradictions within it. So when you look at regulatory income and what you want around regulatory income, and if we think about RMA reform, I would see regulatory income, if that increased, it'd be counterproductive, because that's, it actually seems to be like a handbrake on productivity, on GDP, because more regulations, more costs. So, so the revenue for the council, but it's a cost to somebody else, which is normally the manufacturer or the producer. So, so a comment around that. So I see them as counterfactual. So one will actually stop the other one. And also, just an interesting point, you still use historic data, and I don't know why, like not at this year's economic forum, but last year's, or could be the year before economic forum, we saw GDP Live put up. We see inflation tracking at 2.7 on GDP Live, and I generally check that weekly to see where that's going, and just wonder why, economists and that still try and use 3-month-old data when we have good current data as well, which seems to be far more relevant.
So two responses there. Just briefly on the regulatory income one. The chart I showed was the share of income rather than the total figures. And the point there was more that if the total can't be more than 100%, if you saw an increase, though, in the regulatory income at the expense of other areas, it would effectively highlight that there was more user pays activity happening, which would mean that the cost of whatever's happening then falls more on whoever's getting the benefit, or presumably getting the benefit, rather than sort of being subsidised more generally by the community. Now, I'm not disagreeing with you around sort of regulatory pressures and pricing in general. That's still a major concern. I'm very hopeful of the government's resource management reforms, but also noting there's probably quite a lot of work to happen at a regional council level to enable that. But the premise there, I've been surprised when we've looked through the figures at how little effective user charging there actually is, given that effectively means that rates increases over time are continuing to pay in the broad for a lot of things that probably have a slightly more discrete focus in terms of, yes, there will be some benefits, of course, to the local community and local economy of having certain business activity happening, but a lot of that is still being paid for very directly by the community at large, rather than with a greater focus on sort of who gets the benefit has to pay for that benefit. On the point around GDP and similar, I mean, I guess I'd just highlight that none of the measures are particularly perfect. We've seen GDP Live that has had various misses of activity and what have you over time as well. And probably most importantly, one of the reasons that we do like to look at the other indicators, not just GDP, but other indicators in general, is because we can then start to disaggregate the economy a bit more and figure out what we think is driving it, and therefore what changes might need to be looked at. As I highlighted, we're seeing better manufacturing activity at the moment, but less retail activity. That matters because it says that there's not necessarily a huge amount more stimulus that businesses might need. There's clearly a bit of manufacturing happening, but that households are clearly going back into their shell or haven't left it yet. And so that's where the concern lies around the likes of consumer confidence. That's something that we can't get nearly as easily from the likes of a GDP Live platform either. I'm not saying that we shouldn't be using it. We look at all the numbers at various points, but I'm also not sure, given that even economic activity that's happening today, not myself or any other entity can often react in absolute lifetime. Infometrics as a business, nor I expect the regional council would sort of go, look, we've seen the numbers yesterday. We're going to pivot today. We're going to change all of our work streams. Businesses don't often move at quite that sort of same second to second pace. So the economic data, I think, can be a little bit more lagged. If we're getting 5 years old, it's getting a bit tough with census, but sort of more more reasonable lags, I think, are still useful to understand the trends in the economy.
Yeah, so just to follow up on that, which and it was a good explanation, but within your slides as well, in your graph, and that's what really concerned me, if you look at the productivity side of it and the service side of it, the growth only in your slide, there was industry 3, 6, 9, and 12 were the only ones that I see as the growers. They're the builders and the growers and the producers, and all the others were services that swing off that. So when you look at the percentage of growth in those key industries that actually grow the economy, that the service industry swings off, they weren't very prominent, and that's got a real concern when we start building a society that depends on service growth, not on productivity growth.
Oh, totally agree, and I think that's why as well I profiled the effectively the population-based growth versus the productive-based growth, because it's also that yes, you continue to grow the service economy and similar if you have more people, but eventually the reason that people move to an area is because there are jobs and there's expansion and similar, which requires those other parts of the economy to be moving forward. So absolutely agree with you on that. I thought it was interesting to sort of see the likes of, dairy product manufacturing and similar come through so prominently. I mean, I know it's there, but I personally might have expected it to have, done a bit more of its dash in terms of growth. To see it sort of still coming forward, I think does highlight there's actually still quite a lot of potential changes that can be made there to increase its productivity even further over time.
Thanks, Brad. I'll ask you a question, Brad, but before I do, I'd just like to welcome Harry to the meeting. And Harry and Tarek and Blair, if you feel you've got a question, please put your hand up. We'll welcome your participation. So my question, Brad, is, so you've got the unique ability to put your microscope on the different regions, and Waikato has a lower than average productivity factor. What would you suggest is where we need to focus on to increase the productivity, which eventually is profitability and cash?
Great question. I think, in a sense, it is parts of those sort of non-service-based parts of the economy that probably have a little bit more, not only potential to grow, but also greater ability for the regional council to influence. I think that's one of the challenges a lot of the time, and economic development thinking in general is what can you do? As a regional council, you do have some levers to pull in terms of what happens to planning and regulation, in terms of support for new activities coming forward, for rule changes or the likes. A whole lot harder to do a lot of the other service-based provision, because that's often not something that's in the regional council's remit as much. So a few brief sort of pieces. I think one is around sort of water access in general. We know that over time that there's a huge need for water access to support a lot of primary sectors, and also often sort of goods production and the likes. But of course, water is a more limited resource, and so sort of having a fair and efficient way to access that, but also a sort of fairly rapid way to go through the process on water is pretty vital. The other one is, and I think it's more because of the regional council's ability to coordinate across the region. The Waikato is one of the largest areas in terms of the number of organisations that you have to interact with, right? You've got a lot of councils in the area, you've got a lot of space, you've got a lot of different industry zones and nodes. You go up to the likes of Thames Coromandel, you've got, obviously a lot more tourism, but also an older age bracket, and the likes of Hodaki, a lot more mining. In other parts of the region, some key parts around the primary sector, and others again, you've got the likes of energy generation. So I think it's from a coordinating and strategic point of view, is isolating those different pieces together, because at the moment I think there's still a challenge in the Waikato around coordination. It has gotten better over time, but I'm not sure how many people would necessarily come to the region and think of it as a cohesive region rather than as sort of different bits. Now, everywhere's got their advantages, pulling them together and figuring out how they link forward. So that energy production supporting further manufacturing, some of that supporting the likes of the extractives industries in the right ways and places. I think that sort of coordinating piece that the regional council can do does have a key advantage.
Thanks for that, Brad. Jen.
Thanks. That was very similar to what I was going to ask. But you're in hybrid. The highest productivity per worker in utilities has got thinking it's good that we're working on our energy strategy to building our strengths. The skewing young has just got me thinking, what we plan in government, whether local or central, obviously government as a whole with the representatives doesn't skew young. Have you got some advice? Because I'm thinking, looking at that, the trick will be to keep people in the Waikato, not go out to Auckland, Wellington, or the world, as the many of them are currently.
No, definitely. And I mean, look, put it this way, the Waikato's in a better space having lots of people to be able to try and keep around than otherwise. New population data for the
Just frozen a little bit, Brad.
how about this time?
Brilliant
If you could
analysis,
start, we've
Brad.
got you now. If you could start that again, that'd be awesome.
Okay, fantastic. Sorry about that. Clearly the weather is still playing woes with internet. At some point, Starlink will be with all of us. On the population piece, we have seen sort of continued pressure on that younger age group anyway, and that's only going to get worse as you see more people that aren't having children or aren't having as many. So I think part of that is thinking about from a local perspective, it is about the sort of that jobs interaction. So supporting probably particularly for some of those tech-based jobs, how they sort of can remain local, but also when it comes to those other industries, sort of what the pathway for young people to stick in and remain is, and also the visibility. Now, look, this is a little bit outside of the economic zone that I often play in, but I often find a real challenge when I was at school, when I was interacting with friends, of how much people knew about different jobs that they could go into. The ones that they knew about, they saw on TV that their parents had done or that their friends were engaged with, were often more prominent. Those that were a bit harder to find and see in daily life were ones that they didn't consider as much. So I think pathways to support a bit more of that sort of visibility of those different roles is probably an easy way to provide a bit more support. A lot of others, you can provide all sorts of paid incentives and what have you. They're expensive and often don't necessarily bond people as strongly to a place. The last bit, though, and probably the most important, given that there is a young population or younger population in the region. Part of that is also coming through from the university, part of it because it's a good place or more affordable place for people to live in some parts, is around the sort of lifestyle opportunities for families. And so sort of if you can have the house and you can have the job, but you can also have a good lifestyle, it's that third part that often makes as big of a difference to why people not only locate, but remain in an area.
Okay, thanks, Brad. So we're running out of time. So we've got two quick questions, Mikhail and then Ben. Mikhail?
Yeah, morning, Brad. Sorry, this is kind of off your presentation, but the central government announced the golden ticket for a residency, and that was a huge amount, billions of dollars. How's that going into the economy? Does regions apply for it, or is it the government put these investors up front?
That's a great question. I haven't seen any regional analysis of some of the active investor category work at the moment. My understanding is that you sort of make a pitch as an investor coming in. You've got to invest a certain amount of money, and that you then dictate where it might be, which is also, I think, why there's always an important need for those who work in central government, be it NZTE or the Invest NZ office, to know regional areas so that they can direct through to local opportunities. And if there's not already some linkage there with Invest NZ, I'd suspect that's an important part. I don't know about the regional allocations off the top of my head, but I will make a note to go away and see if there's any information on that.
Thanks, Brad.
I'll get Tariq to talk about that one in particular. Having worked in immigration, it's a vital role to promote the region, which is, I guess, what you're doing. My quick question was, in terms of the rate capping again, I noticed whether there'll be new for LGB terminals, we now have a levy, not a tax, but a levy.
It's not yet.
Yeah.
That's coming.
Yeah. And government is obviously trying to stop targeted rates being added to the rates cap. If you're talking to officials, one of the key things in our submission was that when it comes to flood protection and catchment, they're almost voluntary targeted rates. The farmers are choosing to have them, and it's really important that they're kept out of the system and not frozen at 4%. So just a heads up. Thank you.
Yep, no, duly noted, particularly because I think that's the Waikato has done quite well in those areas to ensure that not only there are options, but clearly people continue to buy into them given the fairly high levels of sort of usage and targeted, or however they're termed, but effective targeted rates being utilised there, which I think is a perfect example of how they should be used. So duly noted.
Thanks, Brad.
Do you want to talk about the immigration?
We're running out of time. Okay, well, Tima, we'll take yours, but this will be the last question.
Kia ora, Brad, thank you for the analysis. I note very little done on the Māori economy given the strength of tainui within the region and the growing economies. Not only that, but most of their population you talk about is my population. We are over 60% of the under 35. So I guess the growth population in the Waikato is brown, they're young. We need them to be educated so that they're not on other pipelines and engaged in the economies. But I note there's still a Māori economy and everybody else conversation that I think we really need to get past. Again, the economic summit last week didn't attract the type of investors that the Ohanga Summit did, but we're operating in the same university, same complex with two different economic conversations. So look forward to your insights about how we bring that together. Kia ora.
Thanks, Tima.
Kia ora. It's a very interesting point. I mean, we have got more and more information over time with on the Māori economy. It's an interesting distinction. I haven't thought about that before in terms of the Māori economy and the rest of the economy, if you will. And I'm genuinely trying to think and figure out what the best way to better engage that conversation is. I mean, certainly in my experience, it often is that Māori organisations often have a different focus from other investment sort of expectations, and I think probably in a much more pro-social way. I know that, the likes of tainui, but also looking at the likes of Ngāi Tahu often are looking a little bit more at housing and opportunities that flow from that, as well as other economic ones. There is, I think, probably a clear need to interact and engage more. I'm not sure how that comes through, but one thing that I'm certainly committed to, we try to talk to different organisations as much as we can. We have found ourselves not quite as much interest in engaging from Māori organisations, but when I'm next in the Waikato, I will well try and find a bit of time to continue the conversation. I think it's probably a bit hard between a screen and a limited time frame, but it's an important conversation. You're absolutely right. It doesn't get surfaced as much, but the distinction is probably less important given that if we're all trying to sort of, grow things overall, that the focus of that has got to be sort of across all groups. I would just reiterate your point around the Māori population locally being younger, but also the investments that have been coming forward from different organisations like tainui and similar around the likes of transport and logistics have been helpful to support some of those wider increases that I've noted as well. So fairly pointed out there.
Thank you, Brad. I'm happy to put you in contact with all the right people when you're in the Waikato. Kia ora.
Okay, thanks, Brad. We'll call it quits here and appreciate your input and been very impressed with your contribution today. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll move on. Could somebody move the acceptance of Brad's report? Ben, seconder, please. Angela, those in favour?
Aye.
Against? No, carried. Okay, we'll move on to Tarek, your report, if you can take over, thanks, and thanks for waiting patiently.
Not at all. So thank you all for the opportunity. Just to recap, obviously we had the discussion at the workshop about 10 days ago. And so the first thing that we're just going to touch on today is the SWOT analysis, which we had a discussion on. So if we could just advance to that slide, please. That's the next one.
You haven't got it.
Popped it in there yesterday. Oh, I did put them in there, but I can join the meeting. Yeah.
So obviously we've got a technical problem. Tara, can you speak to it, because it's your summation will be pretty critical in the discussions going forward.
Yep, sure. So just while we're doing that then, so the picking up on some of the both the preceding discussion and the discussion last time, the comments that were made, the feedback that was provided around some of those strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats has been incorporated. So hopefully you can see your additions in there. The other thing then, just picking up some of those comments from the preceding discussion, probably just the last one, for example, from Councillor Mahuta around the Māori economy, acknowledging that in there as one of the strengths, and included or embedded within that strength is the growing talent and opportunity, which picks up the point around the younger population, etc. Just put that on as a slideshow so that you can see the full glory right there. Yes, and so that's there. Also noting from the preceding discussion around the emphasis on productivity and the importance of that for the region and all regions. So that's in there as well. Also reflecting the discussion around skills and talent, both around retention and attraction of talent too. So if I do acknowledge that some of you were not at the workshop. So if you have any additional comments now that you've had a chance to see the papers over the last week or so, happy for you to share those now, or perhaps afterwards as well. Again, just to reiterate, I guess one of the comments from last time is that these are emphasis. This isn't all of the detail on every single point. So that's important too. Okay, so we can then just move on to the next part of the discussion, which is now starting to look forward into the strategy itself, the strategy proper. And as you've heard already today, as those of you who were at the economics forum last week, no doubt heard as well, that there is a big emphasis on productivity. And productivity, what we're talking about is increasing the value of what is of the economic activity per worker, most typically. And 2 points I just want to pick up on there is that, yes, we have a number of industries or activities with very high value per worker, as was noted, for example, with utilities. Just to point out, with some of those utilities or mining, that they tend to be industries with a very high level of capital involved, of plant, equipment, etc., and relatively few employees, relatively few workers. So when we're looking at the actual visible prosperity within the region, that's a balance that we need to be aware of. Yes, productivity is important, but of those existing high productivity sectors, they don't necessarily employ a great number. That was just one point. And the other is just around the roles of the regional council. So what we're talking about in the economic development strategy is obviously activity and roles by a number of different actors. And as has been pointed out, that includes iwi. The approach that we are taking to that is one around partnership. So less about separate streams or separate conversations, but more of a joined up, a single conversation, a more coordinated approach. And of course, acknowledging and allowing, or deferring to rather, not allowing, deferring to iwi Māori organisations to take the lead in terms of what their aspirations are and their approaches are. And that approach applies to other parties as well. We've also had a conversation today, coincidentally, about the council's contributions or the council's roles when it comes to improving productivity within the region. So this is a recap of something we've talked about a couple of months ago. And so, everything begins at home. And so the first thing that we can do as a council to improve productivity in the region is be as efficient as possible when it comes to delivering our functions. And all of the different contributions we can make flow through from there and extend at the very extreme to those very active economic development activities or functions which could be undertaken at regional scale by local government. But as was pointed out by Brad, it can be difficult to work out exactly which horses to back. And so that's a reason why that's at the bottom of the list. But importantly, before that is that function around coordination. Because of the regional scale, because of the scope of the activities that we've got, because of the existing functions, the core functions that we must undertake, coordination is definitely an important one that we can be undertaking. Within that or alongside that, one of the points that was made obviously was around the attraction of and retention of different sort of factors, whether that's talent, whether that's investment. So investment, particularly an attraction of investment into the region, the question was asked with regards to the active investor visa and the communication recently by the government about the value of the investment that has been attracted into the country. The active investor category or the visa does not have a sort of a weighting or a preference around where that investment goes geographically. So there is an opportunity for the regional investment attraction activity to be working with Invest New Zealand on that aspect because it's basically a facilitation between firms who are looking for investment, those investment opportunities, and it also includes financial investments which are not into active businesses at all, and the potential investors at the other end who are offshore who are looking to come in. And so there is a process of getting those investment opportunities kind of qualified and promoted to those offshore investors. And so the government agency, the Government Investment Promotion Agency, Invest New Zealand, has an important role to play there. And so absolutely we can be working with them to identify those investment opportunities within the region and to be able to put those in front of those offshore investors as well. So finally then, just picking those sort of points up in those strands and noting the important question about what can we be doing to improve productivity in the region. That's exactly the type of question that we're working on and incorporating into that draft strategy. As I say, we've talked about the SWOT analysis and had a look at where some of those opportunities and strengths, particularly where they are at regional scale. And so the activity that we are going to be moving into once we've got some feedback externally on that analysis as well is to roll our sleeves up and get into the strategy itself. So that's what we'll be working on. Do note the timing of committee meetings that's coming up. And so what we will do is look to come back to you at workshops in between to get your input into the process as we go. And of course, come back to you for your May committee meeting with the strategy and the implementation plan for discussion and endorsement at that stage. Happy to take any questions.
Thanks, Tarek, and thanks for the work you've done. And one of the things that Tarek did talk about was in a conversation I've had with Tarek was all the TA around
May,
We
longer
would,
term.
yeah, so we'd certainly be starting the conversations imminently and trying to get that into process as quickly as possible. We do have some early opportunities to do that. In that spirit of collaboration and that spirit of partnership, it's great to see that when the conversation about regional economic development activity starts, that there are positive responses. So we do have a couple of opportunities there. So we would be looking to do that, as I said, in partnership. So it's how quickly we can move that along. But yeah, because we want to get pretty quickly to the activity, we'd certainly be wanting to move as quickly as possible.
Secondly, you talk here, committee to identify business stakeholders. When do you want that sort of feedback?
At your convenience. We're again, because we've got the SWOT analysis now, wanting to get that out for feedback as quickly as possible. So as soon as you can provide those, we can add those to the distribution list and consult them.
I just wanted to say, I think the SWOT analysis is great. It's hard to get a SWOT analysis that covers everything. The only other thing I'd add in, possibly in opportunities and also weaknesses, is AI agents and their impact on the workforce, positive and negative. Yeah.
Okay, thanks, Ben. Go to Tipper and then Jen and then Robbie.
Kia ora te rek. Just noting over my term on council, we've gone from full circle. We were fragmented, then we did some stuff together, now we're fragmented again. So asking how do we maintain a regional strategy without necessarily having to bring all the parties to a table again, whether it's the Mayoral Forum or somebody else holding it back as a region. But I think we did a lot of work to bring together the Waikato Plan, a knowledge strategy, a whole lot of together strategies that now have been abandoned, and we recently abandoned the Te Waka as a vehicle for our collective. So again, I'm trying to figure out what's different now, or what do we need to bring to this conversation to be different? Because otherwise, this is Groundhog Day. This is me when I first started council. Couldn't bring a Waikato Plan together or a Waikato deal together to get funded by Wellington. What do you think we can bring that's different now? All the same players in the room. Dairy's still the biggest industry. Auckland's still the biggest contractor. Again, I've got more background than most, so I'm asking a deeper question and I'm allowed to. Thank you.
Yeah, Councillor Mahuta, obviously you've got 11, 12 years plus background on this. Exactly, yeah. I guess, and the discussion came up at the workshop about 10 days ago as well, and wanting to make sure that we pick up on the lessons of the immediate past, including the experience with Te Waka. And I guess a personal observation coming back into this this kaupapa after 7-8 years is the importance of culture. And the culture of collaboration, of ambition, wanting more, and being committed to actually doing more and doing that together as being critical as a success factor to the successful or to the implementation of an economic development strategy or any kind of activity. Writing a strategy document is easy. Actually bringing it into practice is very difficult. So addressing that will be vital. I think the council's role in providing that leadership and I think maintaining that leadership around the strategy itself will be really important. What we had in the past was activity that was, I guess, it was expected that one entity like Te Waka would do it all, and that's always very difficult. There are so many players. Everyone's got a contribution to make. We've got to recognise that and help with that coordination. That's probably the most valuable thing we can do.
Thanks, Tarek. Jen.
Thanks. Thanks for that. The plan looks good. One part of that is we see as part of those workshops the visions that the various TAs have, so that we just do as an overview, because that will help. And then, yeah, I'll send you a list of stakeholders that I hear from. And yeah, I really liked in Brad's presentation, the first graph was something about, and I've mentioned this in previous training, but the essential and discretionary economy delineation. Great if that could be the strategy as well as the community.
You want to comment, Mark? Okay, no, that's good. Robbie?
Mine is just where I know we're trying to build it since I've been a councillor, but definitely is institutional knowledge. That's not really got anyone in that tier up there. Whereas a panel, it should be on one of those. No. Yeah. So that's it. The same scenarios, our staff have asked to help contribute to stuff, and that's in all areas, not in flood protection and biosecurity and all sorts of things. But it's not really. Yeah.
Yeah, good point. And the collaboration within council around these functions is something that we are actively working on, as well as picking up the point from the chair earlier around the economic development functions around each of the councils. One of the missing pieces of the infrastructure that that we've got is doing that at political level. So we've got this committee. There will be equivalents of it and equivalents to the chair in each of the councils. How do we bring those together for at least a conversation in the same way that the staff are already doing? Is something that we can provide advice on as well.
Thanks, Eric. I'll just make a little comment before bringing Noel in, picking up from Jen's comment and yours, Robbie, is that Tarek intimated that from the regional council economic grouping, that they're actually looking for leadership too. That they're asking for answers, and that highlights the point you make, is that there's a lot of IP floating around. As back to this point, that we just got to be really clever to pick it all up on the way. So,
A lot of it leaves the building and people when they're retiring and doesn't actually get collected.
but we can.
That's the biggest issue with this organisation.
We can't dip back into it if we're smart. Okay, no.
Look, I've been around this topic for around a year now, and I saw each individual council and Waikato district in particular, as Brad highlighted this morning, is we had people, commercial enterprises, local and international, coming at the district, right in center, and you need to look at as an example, millions of dollars has come in there. I was on the committee that worked, the mayoral committee with council and Waikato district. We worked very hard at getting a document together that allows Hamilton to expand, and I see that's been in the news recently. The pressures are there. What I also saw was how each council, especially when it was the Yashili that became was it Mingyu, and then Sinlay, and now another outfit from Australia. The competition between councils, individual councils in this region, to try and attract Yashili to their territory, to their towns. So whilst I just look at that regional leadership for one example, we are not the leaders whilst we remain as different TAs and a regional council. So for me, it's about coordination or support or whatever. But we are not the leaders because each individual council wants the development and new industry in their town. They don't care about the neighbour. They want jobs for their people. So to me, I'm just concerned that, and I sit here on the side, and I'm not trying to be a downer here, but we are not the right people to be the Regional Economic Development Agency. And what I hear leads me down that direction is that because, we are not, but it just sounds like it. So I have serious concerns that we've got to get over the infighting, that the parochialism, etc. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Noel. Karen would like to make a comment before Tarek.
Sorry, Noel, just to respond to your concerns. Tarek is following the council direction for a locally led, regionally connected strategy, and that's what he's speaking to. And he is doing it extraordinarily well in actually giving real respect and genuine support to the locally led approach. And so we hear what you're saying, and there is certainly every intent to deliver on that.
That's not my concern is the word leadership. It's a play on words, but support absolutely. And look, without it, this region's got nothing. So totally support what the intent is. We just better be careful what we appear to be.
Okay, thanks, Noel. Point made. So, Tarek, do you want to comment? Okay, so Ben?
Oh, I was just going to say, it's a coordination function, essentially. That's what we're doing. But I do think the ED committee chairs, the committees in each of the economic development councils have a chair, and bringing them together is a great thing. I don't think it's ever been done. And at the moment, they will be concerned about flood protection and infrastructure, so.
Yes, no, I'd acknowledge Karen for that suggestion. It was, definitely a worthwhile one in terms of, picking up also, as you say, that the concept itself obviously is a good one, but the picking up whatever the concerns may happen to be. And with flood protection, it just so happens that there's an intersection there with what regional council's core functions are anyway. So we've got a real rationale to initiate that.
Okay, thanks, Tarek. And we'll bring it to a close, but I'd like to thank Tarek. He's new to the role, and I think your grasp of it has been extremely good, Tarek, and your enthusiasm. So really appreciate that. So
he's not new to the role in the region. Yeah, I think he started this, didn't he?
With Harvey.
Okay, well, I've got conflicting messages, but hey, it's going well. So I'd just like to have somebody move that the report be received. Somebody. Oh, I've got something. Hey, sorry. Okay. All right. Thanks, Angela. Seconder, please. Ben. All those in favour, please say aye. Against? No. Carried. Okay, we'll move on to the next item, which is to be led by Harvey, food security in the room. I mean, in the region. Yeah, that is, we've got morning tea is a good idea. Thanks, Angela. Welcome, Harvey.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman, and kia ora, councillors, and it's a pleasure to be here today. I'll assume the paper's been read, if that's okay, and I've just got a very brief summary presentation to make, and then I'm very, very happy to. Thank you. So I recognise some of you might be new to the Waikato Wellbeing Project. So just a very, very brief recap. We're an independent organisation, started about 6 years ago. We're actually just in the process of establishing ourselves as an independent charitable trust, and that will be completed very, very shortly. We're focused on better understanding what's really going on in terms of wellbeing issues. And I just want to stress, I'm not using the word wellbeing in some sort of political, ideological way. I just mean, are people okay? Are they getting ahead as families and communities? Our focus is particularly on the household and the whānau, because I think at the end of the day, that's where it really matters. So we can all talk about affordability of food or housing or energy or whatever, but really what matters is what does it look like to real people in the real world. We commission and synthesize evidence from experts, but we also do privilege the voice of real people in the community and their lived experience. We're looking to surface underlying drivers, root causes, if you like, and not just describe symptoms. And then, like you and like many others, we get together the people who can do something about it, whether it be government, iwi councils, community organisations, and the private sector, and look to share what we've learned with them so that they can make the best decisions for their people and their communities moving forward. So the blue boxes there are just an example. And the Hauraki opportunity, which for the Hauraki councillors was work we did, started just after Cyclone Gabrielle on what really matters to people in the Hauraki rohe, by which we mean Thames Coromandel, Hauraki, and Matamata Piaka. Next slide, please. So the Kai Challenge, why are we interested in food? Well, it's probably self-explanatory to you all in terms of from a household economic point of view. It is one of the main drivers of the household budget. It is also one of the issues that severely affects whānau and community wellbeing if it is unavailable or too expensive. So over the last couple of years, we've asked some basic questions. How much food does the Waikato actually produce? What kind of food? And how much food do people in the Waikato need in order to live a good life? And then to use that to address cause and effect questions. What action can be taken to address food insecurity and deprivation? And how might we collectively improve overall food security in the Waikato, and how? Next slide. So we commissioned a piece of work which has got the strange name of a food shed, which is obviously a play on watershed. And it basically looks to identify, well, how much food do we actually produce in the Waikato region? And where is that produced across what types of different categories? We used a data set called the AgriBase, which is a product by Assure Quality Limited. It's a confidential database of what's produced on every farm in the region. So we don't make the database available, but what we've done is aggregated it together so we can see patterns across the region. So the key statistics there: how much food, what kind of food, where, what's exported versus what's consumed locally, and who consumes it. You will all have the diagram, and my eyesight's too old now to actually read it exactly myself. But the headline factors for me is that the region produces about 7 million tonnes of food a year. 93% of that is dairy. And if you compare that to how much food the Waikato region's 500 or so thousand people consume, they consume about 360 or 350,000 tonnes of food per year. So 7 million versus 360,000. So it's a rather obvious thing to say. But if we have food insecurity in the Waikato region, it's not because we don't produce enough food. There's enough food by many orders of magnitude produced in the region. So just next slide. And Mr. Chairman, I'm happy if anyone wants to stop me at any point to ask any questions. This is a slide of the geography of food production, and many of you will be intuitively aware of this, but we thought it was quite useful as well because I'd never seen a map produced of this before. At the gross level, there's a pretty obvious east-west distinction between beef and sheep on the west and more dairy in the centre, and less so where there are major areas of either conservation land or forestry. So predominantly, and that aligns with the statistics that we saw in the food shed analysis of itself in terms of how much land do we have and what's the allocation of land. It's roughly 50-50 between sheep and beef and dairy.
Ben has a question. Yeah, before you get to the food security issue, this is really interesting data that I haven't seen before, and it would be useful to have into our economic analysis too, because we always talk about the importance of us producing food, but we don't actually have the figures. But interestingly, red meat takes up 51% of the producing land to produce 200,000 tonnes.
Yes.
And vegetables are 0.4%, and they also produce 200,000 tonnes.
Yes, yes.
It's
Hey Ben, I know which I'd prefer to eat, but carry on.
I'm sure you eat vegetables. So it would be, I think, very helpful if we could get that data. I would hopefully that they would use different blues, other than blues. It's impossible to actually tell which is vegetable and which is
Oh,
not.
at that scale, Councillor, yes, it is. That data is all available. It's all on our website. We can get you the original graphics. But your point is quite right. I mean, the most efficient land food production for, activity in the Waikato from memory is actually poultry, because it produces the most volume of food for the smallest amount of area.
And yet when we went on a tour, I was amazed at how much of our area is vegetable growing that we don't think about. It's to the north. So
you can see it to the north. It's the green blob around Tuakau.
Yeah.
You need to be careful with those statistics. So poultry does on its area, but you've got to think about where the feed comes to feed the chooks. Yeah. So that grain's growing outside. So I know what the poultry growers how much grain they purchase, and it certainly isn't out of that chook house.
Correct, Councillor. What we're looking here is production versus area.
Okay.
Next slide. Thank you. The second, so that was sort of the what have we got piece of work we did is on what state of food security and insecurity in the Waikato, and that's a report amongst plenty, and obviously that hopefully that is self-evident, and the plenty is we produce plenty of it, and yet there is want. So there's a paradox there. 9 to 10% of households and about 10 to 12% of children in the Waikato face food insecurity. And from memory, that's a statistic from the census, which means that you go without food at least once per week, or are at risk of going out without food at least once a week. Once you do the stats, and this is not meant to be a trick, it's just meant to give you some scale, those percentages mean there's about 18,000 households in the Waikato region who are facing food insecurity on a continuous basis, or if you like, the entire population of Taupo and Aotearoa, to give you some scale. So this piece of work is available also on our website, and some of the statistics are here. And once we looked at that, the conclusions that the authors reached and the report reached are there, so that the system has some major imbalances. It's dominated by large-scale production processing systems, as we saw, and a corporate retail duopoly. I'll talk more about that a little bit later. We all change, understandably. It's unlikely that we're about to see the sudden entry of a third retail supermarket operator, for example. So we really need to say, well, what else can we do that helps with food security at the margin? Because while 18,000 households is a lot, what that also means is for the vast majority of people, the system more or less works. The spectacle of food insecurity certainly does challenge the social license of our major, especially retail food providers, and that's something that can be lent on to get them to help out more. For that part of the system which the market simply is unable to work for, and obviously every market has some degree of failure and every market can't provide for everybody, there is some opportunity for community-based action, whether that be through things like community gardens, marakai, iwi-based food initiatives. There are data and good data, and this report brings this together, perhaps for the first time in the Waikato. Next slide, please. Now this reduces to the unreadable at the scale you're looking at, but it's all in the report. So what we've started to do is track some basic indicators of food security for the Waikato. Is that a battery issue? Which we will be tracking over time, and we think provides some useful indicators on the effectiveness of the system. So the first one is the cost of a healthy diet, and that's based on I think it's Ministry of Health data on what constitutes a good diet for a family, and that is then looked at in terms of price. So the researchers actually went across a number of supermarkets around Waikato District and Hamilton and looked at price differences, and there are definite price differences between different supermarket operators, but we can track that. Government support, the number of food-related income transfers for government for food, food parcels, the number of community-based responses, so whether that's through people like Salvation Army, Vinnie's, and so forth. I have to say that data is very hard to come by. The food charity industry is very competitive, paradoxically. So I think we asked 27 food charities how many packages they gave out every year, and about 5 of them were willing to tell us because they're all vying for the same money, the same grant money, whether it be from government or from philanthropics. Income adequacy, I thought, was one of the most interesting things we did. So we looked at the household economic budget and we looked at it in terms of income versus weekly outgoings for the essentials, which you can see there, so things like rent, clothing, power, transport, and food. And there are some definite household categories who are essentially underwater every week. Tends to be two-parent families with very low or no income or unemployed, and people who are relying entirely on superannuation. Basically, every week they will be at a position where it's either food or keep the lights on or pay the rent or something like that. And as I'm sure you're all aware, you can't delay rent, you can't delay the mortgage, but you can certainly not have dinner that night. And so food becomes the delayable factor. And a number of at-risk households as well, we've been tracking that. And while there has been some improvement in the last few years, there are still certainly, I think for us all, an unacceptable number of households who are facing insecurity of food. So that's the data. Next slide, please.
I'll just take Jen's question.
At the
Sure.
end's fine.
You can
Yeah,
wait?
yeah,
Okay,
totally.
let's carry on.
Thank you, Mr. Chair,
Lovely.
and I'm very happy to answer. This is a real human issue. I think we all sort of, we all know we need food, and we all know that food insecurity is a sort of it's a real sort of it's a failure on all of our part if anyone is going hungry. But when we looked into this data, one of the most striking pieces of evidence I found was that if you looked at food price inflation over the last 10 years and compared that to wage inflation over the last 10 years, wages have actually risen a little bit faster than food. So if those were the only two things we worried about, food has, you might not believe us, but got a little bit cheaper relative to everything else over the last 10 years. So that then says to me there's something else driving food off the table. If I put on that graph house price inflation, I think you start to see what it is. And so the Wellbeing Project's sort of core theory of change, if you like to put it right now, is that the region's food insecurity issue is really an income and housing affordability issue. As long as rents occupy up to 40% of some families' incomes, as long as it still takes 6 times the median income to buy a house in Hamilton, then what you will see is things like food getting pushed off the table. I hear a lot of people speaking about the fact we need to reform the supermarket industry, and certainly just like whether it be housing or energy, we need competitive markets to make these things work, and there are some failures in that. But I think the supermarket industry, for better or for worse, works adequately for most people. And so we need to focus in on where are the issues. I just noted there are obviously some important environmental and cultural trade-offs to consider when looking at the industrial food system. I'm not saying they don't occur. That's an important role that organisations like the Regional Council provide.
I'll just stop you there and I'll take Jen's
Sure.
question and then Angela's.
Sure, and great to have that you've managed to give a voice to the local community so deep. That's been a really good outcome. The thing that's always interested me on this topic was the food resilience with geopolitical issues going on and things. So it's really interesting to know that volume-wise we have right amounts, but obviously we don't all want to eat milk powder and stuff like that. Right. So one question was, had you had a look at as resilience perspectives of what we can bring in from elsewhere in New Zealand?
Yes.
Yeah, and so if you comment on that, and the other one was, I'll just.
Yeah, so in the food share report, there is actually a complete breakdown by food type. And so what you find, obviously, is that the Waikato region produces quite a lot more than it needs in terms of dairy, beef, things like that. we actually have a deficit of things like legumes, nuts, fruits. And I'm very, very cautious about anything that kind of implies that we need to sort of almost isolate our food economy and become self-sufficient. Because
Well, it depends where you draw the boundary, right?
well, it depends where you draw the boundary, because that sort of pretends that comparative advantage
yeah.
doesn't exist. And I would be very wary of that, because if we take that to its logical extreme, then we wouldn't trade with the rest of the world. And there's some other people in the world who take that view, and it's not helpful. So I think we need to say, what are we particularly good at that we can actually earn more for our people than by doing something else, and that's the concept of opportunity cost. You don't make things because you're the best at it. You make things because you're the least worst at it. But then also, how do we make sure that the system across all of New Zealand is working adequately, and with the rest of the world? And there's always risks associated with that, as we know through international trade. That's the reality of it.
Oh, it's just because they're growing, but I'm
yeah.
interested. I'm just
Angela?
commenting back. Thank you.
Or was there another question?
It's Angela.
Oh, sure.
Thanks for the report. I haven't had a chance to look in depth on your website or anything lately. You mentioned about government grants. Are you able to talk about the school lunch program and where that sort of fits in with food security?
Yeah, I don't think those figures include school lunches. It obviously fits in, and it's obviously a mitigating factor in terms of household food insecurity. And I would take that as an indicator, again, of two things: some degree of system failure, but also income inadequacy. And I think it's very, very important that those services are there to address those issues. I don't really want to get into a debate about whether it's the right food or the wrong food or what it's called, but I would keep on coming back to, they are very important bottom of the cliff issues that we must address right now. But you don't solve the bottom of the cliff issues at the bottom of the cliff. You need to ask, why are children coming to school inadequately fed? What's the reason for that? So it's kind of like, walking gum and chewing gum and walking at the same time. You have to think of the very big long term while also being a good society and addressing the immediate now.
Okay,
Thank you.
I'll take Gary, and then however you can carry on, and I'll come back to Tipper just so that we just get your.
Absolutely. I've got one slide left after this, Mr. Chairman.
I'd like to challenge some of what you presented. I suppose I take a bit of exception to say where it's our responsibility and our problem, and not once in your report did you address personal responsibility, of the individual. And and I think it's a big part to play. My daughter had a I assume refugee couple moved in next door to their place, and the first thing they did was ripped up their whole lawn, including a little strip down the middle of their drive, and planted sweet corn in the front strip and vegetables out the back. They looked at, there was not one blade of grass left, and everything was covered with food to grow for themselves. So that was the first thing, and also challenge your thinking on, you just directly linked house pricing with food insecurity. And last week at the Economic Forum, we saw the increase in methamphetamine and the impact that that's having on households and family. And so I would almost say and it'd be interesting in your comment on it, there's a more of a correlation between increase in drug use and food insecurity or household poverty than household prices.
Oh, thank you, Councillor. I don't really think I want to debate either of those points, really. I think they're both valid, and I'm not really saying that self-responsibility isn't a factor. I think it absolutely is. And for those people and communities who have that choice and can exercise that choice, that's fantastic. And I absolutely support it. And I mentioned in their community activism and local community gardens and so forth. I think that's a great thing. There are many people, of course, who don't necessarily have that choice, whether that be because they simply don't have the time or the resources or the space. But that's absolutely right, what you were saying. And I've got a garden at home, and it takes up way too much of my time, but it's an important source of food for me as well. The methamphetamine point, I think, is absolutely fair. What I'm simply observing is that when you look at this in terms of the evidence of the household economic budget, what is impinging most into that budget in a volumetric sense, if I can put it that way, is housing, and that impingement has got greater and greater over time.
Okay, we'll carry on. Thanks, Harvey.
So, yep, so it's really that income adequacy and housing point, and your point's taken, Councillor. So last slide, please. So it's not an isolated issue. It's a visible symptom of a much wider issue of economic hardship. And so it needs to be looked at across all of the issues which I've mentioned, and that others that maybe I haven't mentioned as well. We need to keep monitoring these indicators so we know what's going on over time. There are some very effective community and Māori-led responses that are out there and that we probably all know of, right from the individual through to larger scale ones. But they tend to be fragile. And what I mean by that is if you look, for example, at community gardens, they tend to be reliant on one particularly motivated individual. And when that person, who's the person who turns up in weeds and tens and that kind of thing, if they either retire, move on, it often puts them at peril. So they are very fragile systems. They need to be supported. Not too dissimilar to what Tariq was saying, the opportunity really lies in coordination, enabling leadership and strengthening the connections between all of us in terms of how the system works, rather than necessarily creating new programs. And I'm very happy to answer your questions any further. Thank you.
Thanks, Harvey.
Probably wanted to talk more about food certainty and security as a health outcome, knowing that in Western civilization, obesity and diabetes and health-related concerns aligned to that as the other growing 15%. So you've got scarcity at this end, obesity at this end,
Yes.
causing a different health outcome. And knowing that in public health, we spend so much money in that area. I'm wondering, but all the advocacies aren't lined up. So how do you coordinate with other people who have the same outcome to give us the same assurance? Likewise, everybody who's anti-sugar drinks, fat foods, whatever. If you come to Huntly, we have 22 diabetes-fueled stores selling cheap food for families that can't afford healthy food. So double that down. I have diabetes in my community for the ongoing future, and we live in the middle of a food bowl. It's kind of that disparity, but and because the councillor talked about the effects, 7 generations of no land ownership does lend to some of the things people have been discussing at this table. So kia ora.
Kia ora.
Comment?
No.
Okay, the comments made. Okay, Ben?
Firstly, I just wanted for the record to acknowledge that Harvey with Dallas Fisher actually set up the first EDA here, Te Waka. So he's had an involvement in this, but that currently the Wellbeing Project is independently funded by Well Networks, and perhaps you can explain you've got a link with us, but we don't necessarily fund you. But I was going to ask about the Social Investment Agency. That's now the government set up, and there's a big push towards that. Is this sort of policy going to be picked up by them, and are you promoting that regionally?
Thank you, Councillor. There's a bit in there, and yes, I established Te Waka. Where we're going is the Well Energy Trust have been our funder for the last 5 years, and the funding we have through that will keep us going for about another 8 months. And so we're looking towards other funders now into the future. We've been an unincorporated entity and not even a legal entity of any particular type for the last 5 years. We've been very, very grateful to have the support of the Regional Council, who have basically provided the umbrella for us to work under, but it's actually difficult to receive funding from others when you don't legally exist. So that's why we're setting ourselves up, which I'd rather not in a way, but that's what we are doing. The Social Investment Agency, well, we with Trust Waikato or Waikato Tainui and the university in November held the Social Investment Summit at University of Waikato on the same whare that everyone else was talking about a minute ago. And that was the first signal, I think, about the work that we've been doing, especially with Trust Waikato and Tainui, about at its heart, I think social investment is about getting back up the ladder towards the things where you can have more leverage and you can make a bigger change, because of the long-term big impact issues. And we're really interested in that. And so as we reform the Waikato Wellbeing Project, what we're looking to do is align that more with the social investment approach as is relevant and appropriate for the Waikato. And we are in preliminary conversations with the Social Investment Agency about how we can do that in a way where we inform them at the more local level about what's really going on. So, you know, out of the beltway, but we are also able to benefit from the much bigger system-wide insights that they are getting also. So just like Tarek was saying, we're trying to sort of look through the bureaucracies rather than just creating another one.
Thanks for that, Harvey. I'll ask a question. I apologise. I didn't realise you were involved in Te Waka, and that's
guilty.
Sorry,
guilty.
Oh no, not at all. It did a lot of excellent work, so I appreciate that. Using your background and your experience, a lot of us here own land and are farmers, and one of the fears we've had in the preceding years has been the lack of the right to choose the crop that suits our land, and we've got that with the vegetable industry. It's almost ring fenced, and yet this land is incredibly, we've got some awesome land here that we can increase the potential. Have you discussed that in a previous life and your current life in the work you're doing?
What comes to mind, Mr. Chairman, is just a comment that I found myself making a lot when I was involved in economic development, that we've got to be really clear what we mean by productivity. And productivity means, in my view, the highest economic yield from a unit of land or a person that is achievable at least cost, including least environmental impact. And I think that should be the goal. I'm reluctant to say this land should be this or that, this land should be that, because I'm not in that position. I don't have that responsibility. But I also think that's kind of interesting, because the people who actually work the land probably know that best.
Okay, all right. We'll come to the end, unless there's any other questions quickly. So thanks, Harvey. Enjoyed your presentation and the depth of comment with your presentation. So thank you for that. Thanks, Ben. Seconder, please, received. So who's second? Tipper, thanks, Tipper. All those in favour, please say aye. Against, no, carried. Thanks, guys. We'll have a 10-minute break. Back at 25 past. Sorry, Blair and that. We're having a bit of a break. And David, yeah, sorry. Give us 10 minutes. So you can have.